Good morning, good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Can you hear me well? Can somebody respond, please?
Yes, Rohana, yes.
Thank you. Excellent. Right. Hello again, everyone, and a warm welcome to those who just joined this session. This is the day 2 of the Global Aquaculture Conference, and my name is Rohana Subasinghe, and I will be your facilitator for this session. Just so we are sure everyone is in the right place, this is the parallel session stream 2. That is the green stream, and our topic is today, biosecurity, reducing the burden of disease. As I also mentioned during the last session, the thematic sessions were proposed by the International Program Committee for the conference, and a group of experts have drafted papers on each thematic topic. These papers identify the current status, the issues and challenges moving forward, and to formulate recommendations on how these can be addressed for each thematic area. These draft papers have been posted on the GZA conference website since the beginning of this month, and participants are invited to review the papers and provide feedback to the Secretariat, and this opportunity will remain open until 15th October. This feedback will be considered by the authors in finalizing the papers for publication. The presenters today will present summaries of the key findings of the papers, and the feedback provided in the panel session will also be considered in the finalizing the thematic papers. Please note that this session is being interpreted. Please remember to select your preferred language in the interpretation button, which you will see at the bottom of your screen. I would like to introduce our local moderator for the session now, who will be moderating the room in Shanghai for the panelists, for the presenters live in Shanghai, Professor Shang Qing Li, who you can see on the screen now. Professor Shang Qing Li is the Director of Organism Disease Control and Molecular Pathology Division of the Yellow Sea Fisheries Research Institute. He is a highly experienced researcher holding many positions, both nationally and internationally. Allow me to introduce our speakers today. First, we have Dr. Victoria Aldai, who led the development of this biosecurity review along with me. Victoria is a veterinarian with an MSc and a PhD from Stirling University. She has worked over 30 years on diverse aspects of shrimp and fish biosecurity at international, national, and farm levels. She has collaborated as an expert for international organizations such as FAO, EU, EFSA, World Bank, OIE, as well as with the private sector worldwide. She claims many publications in peer-reviewed journals, books, and magazines. She edited the famous Shrimp Book. Presently, Victoria is the Director of Biosecurity and Breeding Program for the National Aquaculture Group of Saudi Arabia, NACWA. Following Victoria, I will present the next section of the review, and do not need to say much about myself. I've been facilitating to you since yesterday and today. With us today also have Dr. Peter de Schrijver. Peter is trained as a bioengineer in environmental sciences, and is specialized in microbial biotechnology. Following his passion for aquaculture, he performed his PhD and postdoc research at the Laboratory of Aquaculture and Artemia Reference Center at the Ghent University. He investigated the presence and importance of beneficial and harmful microorganisms in aquaculture systems and how their interactions influence the health of cultured animals. You will hear some of these things from his presentation in a minute. Peter now leads the Innovations Expert Group on Health and Environment at INVE Aquaculture. One of their main targets is the development and use of novel microbial-based technologies and approaches to promote animal health and to minimize the impacts of disease. We also have Dr. Melba Riantazo of FAO. Dr. Riantazo, an aquatic animal health specialist, is responsible for development work on aquaculture biosecurity and aquatic health management, including antimicrobial resistance in FAO's aquaculture group. Over the past years, Melba led a number of international aquatic disease investigation task forces and pioneered capacity development on risk assessment for aquatic animal movement, both at national and regional levels. She spearheaded the development of the Progressive Management Pathway for Improving Aquaculture Biosecurity, PMPAB, which you will hear the details from her presentation. She has been heavily involved in the activities of the Fish Health section of the Asian Fisheries Society, also holding positions of chairperson and executive secretary. She holds an MSc and a PhD in fish health and currently serves as the team leader of the Food Safety, Nutrition and Health at the FAO's Fisheries and Aquaculture Division. Dr. Victoria is not physically presenting today, but we will see the presentation, her presentation on video. Secretariat, can we have Dr. Victoria's introductory recording, please?
Hello, everyone. My name is Victoria Aldai. Welcome to the Biosecurity session. First, we would like to thank FAO, the Ministry of Agriculture, the Chinese government, and NACA for organizing this event and inviting us to participate. The title of our paper is Biosecurity, Reducing the Burden of Diseases. We are six main co-authors. One is Dr. Rohana Subasinghe, formerly with FAO and currently with Futurefish Sri Lanka, Dr. Andy Singh from INVE Thailand, Dr. Huang Ye from NACA Thailand, Dr. Melba Riantazo from FAO, Professor Patrick Sorvelo from the University of Ghent, and myself, Victoria Aldai from NACWA in Saudi Arabia. The process we have used to prepare this paper is not the usual approach. What we did is the co-authors, we discussed together what were the most relevant issues in biosecurity and which are the ones that we need to tackle urgently for the next 10 years. So once we identified these areas, we invited lead contributors.
Hello. I can't see anything on the screen.
Rohana, if we can show the slides, I can present live. I have good internet today.
Do you? Okay, right. Let me try to share my screen. Where are you? Victoria?
Yes, yes. If you can go up, this is the last slide. Higher, up. Yeah, here, the process.
Okay.
Yes, apologies for this.
Go ahead, please.
I was trying to explain the process that we used to prepare the paper. Instead of using the usual review approach, what we did, it was to identify the most relevant issues in different areas of aquaculture biosecurity. At that point, then we identified the lead contributors, and then each lead contributor for each specific area invited experts to join the discussion. Next one, please. So the result of this process is we ended up with 73 experts contributing to the paper. Rohana, maybe the animation is not showing with all the names. Oof. No, go back. It's okay. Go back. So if we look at the contributors from the origin of their affiliation, we find that we have 30 people from Asia, we have 2 from Australia and the Pacific, 10 from the Americas, 2 from the Middle East, 34 from Europe, and we are very sorry we didn't have anyone affiliated from Africa. However, some of the experts that contributed are currently working with in Africa, so we capture also the issues of biosecurity in this continent. If we look at the list of contributors in terms of the sector they are working in, we have, maybe Rohana, can you try again? No, one backwards. I cannot read it.
Right.
Yeah, we have 20 people from
yeah.
academia, 8 people from international agencies, 5 from government, and from the private sector. We have about 20 contributors from services, and we have 10 contributors from aquaculture producers. And we felt very proud to have 10 of these aquaculture producers as they are key for the implementation of biosecurity. So this is the final content of the paper. First, there is a review on the historical perspectives regarding the 2 previous global conferences. And then we have a list of topics, achievement, issues, and challenges. Maybe we don't cover all possible issues on biosecurity, aquaculture biosecurity, but we cover what we believe is the most important topics that we need to face. So one of them is healthy seed, emergency preparedness and response, diagnostics, microbial management, disease and pathogen surveillance, disease reporting and trade, policies and regulatory frameworks, fish welfare, research and technology, antimicrobial resistance, non-conventional ways of pathogen transfer, and the FAO project progressive management pathway. Finally, we end the paper with the way forward. Before closing this introduction, we would like to remind our audience what is aquaculture biosecurity. And for that, we use the definition that was coined during the FAO project progressive management pathway, where it says that aquaculture biosecurity is the cost-effective management of risks posed by pathogenic agents to aquaculture through a strategic approach at enterprise, national, international levels with shared public-private responsibilities. So just one back, Rohana. It's very important to stress these different points because we often don't see it in other definitions. It has to be cost-effective. It works at international, national, and farm level, and it's a shared public-private responsibility. Next one, please. And just finally, to show the complexity of aquaculture biosecurity, here, if we use the classical SNIESCO diagram for disease expression, we have the component of the animal, the environment, and the pathogen. Next, please. So when we work on biosecurity, we need to work on each of these components. So if we look at the animal, we need to look at health status, whether it's SPF or clean seed, the genetic response to disease, tolerance, resistance, susceptibility, epigenetics, vaccines, nutritional status, etc. When we look at environment, and that includes cultural conditions, we have husbandry, welfare, the infrastructure, feed and feed management, water quality, etc. When we look at the pathogen, we work on translocation, transmission, pathogenesis, surveillance program, microbial management, etc. And we have to work on these 3 areas at 3 levels, at farm level, national level, and international level. And all of it within an economic frame. It needs to be cost effective and it has to protect the profit. And I think that is all. I leave the floor to you, Rohana. Thank you very much. And apologies for all the technical problems.
No problem. Thank you, Victoria. Thank you very much. That ends Victoria's introduction. Then I will continue the presentation with a few added sections. I will be talking about historical perspective and a few other aspects at what she mentioned. Over the past decades, we have experienced two interesting trends. First, approximately every 3 to 5 years, an unreported pathogen emerges, spreads rapidly, and causes serious disease outbreaks. Second, known diseases of reported pathogens re-emerge across the borders. It is evident that uncontrolled or unregulated movement of fish or shrimp or animals are generally responsible for the international spread of pathogens. It is evident there also exist many such examples of transboundary disease outbreaks. Use of wild broodstock or broodstock exposed to wild animals, or stocks fed with infected fresh or live feeds appear to be responsible for some of these disease outbreaks. FAO has been promoting the importance of aquatic animal health management and aquatic biosecurity over the past 3 decades. In February 2000, some 540 participants from 66 countries attended the Conference on Aquaculture in the Third Millennium held in Bangkok, Thailand. Conference participants discussed strategies for the development of aquaculture for the next 2 decades in the light of the future economic, social, and environmental issues and advances in aquatic technologies. The participants of the conference adopted the Bangkok Declaration. The Bangkok Declaration, the historical Bangkok Declaration, explicitly called for efforts to improve aquatic animal health management in aquaculture. 10 years later, the 2010 FAO NACA revisited the Bangkok Declaration and assessed the progress made on implementation of these recommendations. The Global Conference on Aquaculture 2010, held in Phuket, Thailand, confirmed that the Bangkok Declaration and strategy will continue to be the core instrument guiding the development and management of aquaculture beyond 2010 through the first quarter of this century. Over the past 2 decades, we have made notable progress in understanding and controlling diseases of certain cultured species. Examples of some major accomplishments include the development and widespread use of specific pathogen-free, or in short, SPF, shrimp stocks, and the development of sensitive and rapid molecular diagnostic techniques. We should not be complacent. More research is needed to develop health management strategies and tools for mass-produced species such as carps, tilapias, and catfishes, where the production is largely contributed by the smallholders. As Victoria mentioned, in the review, we identify several issues which are continuing to challenge the design and implementation of efficient and effective biosecurity strategies and protocols at all levels. You can see them on the screen. In my presentation, I will deal with 4 of those, which are highlighted in blue, and my colleagues will present the rest. First and foremost, clean and healthy seed is one of the most important prerequisites for preventing disease outbreaks in aquaculture. This is a fact. Infections do not necessarily manifest disease, and often infected broodstock in many species does not show signs of disease. The only way to tackle this situation and to avoid vertical transmission is to exclude pathogens from broodstock, which subsequently resulted in clean seed. This principle, for the first time, was used in aquaculture to develop the SPF shrimp, the Penaeus venami. SPF shrimp has been responsible for the exponential growth of the shrimp production in Asia. Although accessibility and affordability of SPF shrimp to smallholders is still a challenge in many countries, we think the situation will improve in the coming years. Benefits of applying SPF principles and technology in shrimp aquaculture have prompted research into what we call SPF fish. Invention of healthy SPF fish, if at all possible, targeting for what we call people's fish, the mass-produced carps, tilapias, and catfishes, which are accessible and affordable to smallholders, will give or offer significant opportunities and benefits for improving aquatic biosecurity worldwide. Advanced molecular biological research resulted in the development of rapid diagnostic tests or procedures. These tests have largely displaced tissue-based techniques that generate much more information, which allows a clear interpretation of health status and the disease process. The shift from tissue-based techniques to molecular techniques has also reduced, to some extent, the diagnostic accuracy. Most available molecular tests and techniques still focus on commercially important high-value species. The development of affordable, easy, and rapid diagnostic tests for mass-produced species, again, my three groups, carps, tilapias, and catfishes, are equally important and urgently needed. Accurate and affordable farm-level diagnostic tools for carps, tilapias, and catfishes are also missing. Point-of-care diagnostics, or what we call POCDs, or in simple terms, pond-side diagnosis, can facilitate better diagnosis and disease management in aquaculture without the delays associated with conventional laboratory testing. In disease diagnosis, balancing response time, accuracy, and the cost is extremely important. Empowering farmers' capability to carry out health checks on their farms in real time is a solution for managing health, particularly in the small-scale producer sector. The three levels of diagnosis, level 1, level 2, and level 3, which has been long promoted by FAO since late 90s, still remains valid as a continuum of observations from the field to the laboratory, which is necessary for accurate diagnosis. Aquatic animal disease reporting serves two main functions, one related to responsible trade and the other related to controlling disease. The dual function, the dual objectives, these dual objectives place a great strain on the disease reporting system, as they can frequently be in conflict. Reports of new disease or occurrences of known diseases in one country can lead to unfair trade barriers. Aside from being contrary to the SPF agreement of the WTO and the OI standards, unfair trade barriers create disincentive to countries or the producers to report disease outbreaks. Despite several initiatives over the past 20 years, many countries still lack the expertise, capacity, and infrastructure to operate effective disease reporting systems at the national level. The OIE list of notifiable diseases is the standard for international reporting. Although the requirements and the process for meeting a pathogen or disease to a listed as notifiable to OIE is robust, to achieve the true benefit of disease reporting, the listing process needs to be significantly accelerated. International reporting systems and the implications of trade have been complicated by the inclusion of aquatic animal commodities and products within the OIE code. This issue needs further discussion and debate, including the comparative risks they pose against the live aquatic animals. We know much about the conventional ways of pathogen transfer. However, our knowledge and focus on unconventional ways of pathogen transfer is grossly inadequate. Complex hydrodynamic regimes and associated ecological processes disregard human-made administrative borders. They allow natural dispersal of harmful aquatic organisms and pathogens, or in short, we call HAOPs, between ecosystems. Anthropological activities such as shipping in the sea disturb ecosystems and increase the rates of transfers of HAOPs beyond their natural habitats. HAOPs often exhibit robust biological traits and can reproduce over time, which makes their eradication almost impossible. This makes HAOPs a challenging hazard in managing aquatic biosecurity. Efficient management of ballast waters is also necessary to ensure good biosecurity to sustain aquaculture. Another complex shipping issue is the HAOP transfer risk through biofouling. In this regard, to address this issue of biofouling, International Maritime Organization's guidelines should be respected by all stakeholders. I will stop at that. Thank you. And then the presentation will continue by Dr. Peter Schreiber. Peter, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rohana. Is this sound okay? Everybody can hear me?
Can hear you well.
Okay, perfect. Thanks. As mentioned, I will present the next 3 topics within this thematic review on biosecurity, and I will tackle them one by one. Next slide, please, Rohana. The first one deals with microbial management at production level. As you're likely all aware, part of biosecurity is to prevent the introduction and spread of primary pathogens throughout the culture facilities. And that's why approaches such as disinfection are crucial to minimize the risk of infectious disease being caused by these primary pathogens. Unfortunately, it's not good enough to totally minimize the risk caused by pathogens overall. Next slide, please. Because what we have to realize is that efficient disinfection, for example, it's always followed by regrowth of bacteria inside the system, whether we like it or not. And what is too little realized is the importance of which bacteria are able to grow again and the reasons why these kind of bacteria can then start to grow again. To give an example, following disinfection, we have created a different condition in the system, for example, where the amount of substrate compared to the number of bacteria present has turned very high. And this results in a selection or gives opportunity for a specific group of bacteria to develop, the so-called R-strategic bacteria. And unfortunately, many of these opportunistic or secondary pathogens, such as the Vibrios, they belong to this ecological group of bacteria. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you. So that's why we always have to complement these kind of preventive and exclusion approaches with efforts to try to install a good population of microbes inside the system. And nowadays, this is mainly done by the application of probiotics. I think this is a practice known to everybody. And it's a practice that has already truly shown its value throughout the industry. But we should and we can even do better, because what we should really have to target is the installation of a total community of good bacteria, so-called case-strategic bacteria inside the system, of which the members are generally considered as harmless for the animals that we are culturing. So the fact that probiotics do not completely comply with this case-strategic aspect all the time, this is something that we can improve. So it's in fact really the balance between R-strategic bacteria and case-strategic bacteria that really determines the risk for bacterial interference by secondary and opportunistic pathogens. But even with the use of disinfection and probiotics, this remains rather unpredictable. It's kind of a Russian roulette where the bullet is a bacterium or a group of bacteria, and it's almost impossible to predict what will happen. But we can improve, and we can improve by looking into system design and the operations of our systems, which seem to be crucial parameters. And there we can learn a lot from empirical observations of the systems that we are using and the improvements that are being made on a trial and error basis within the industry. Think, for example, of the implementation of protein skimmers to remove organic matter, implementation of a recirculation system at small scale, including a biofilter, or even at farm level, where we change the system from flow-through system to a large number of ponds into a recirculation system where different ponds are being sacrificed to include a kind of treatment of the water before being recirculated into the production ponds. Now, all of these systems, they seem to have as a common denominator that they influence the microbes, for example, in function of the amount of substrate compared to the amount of bacteria present, and also ensure a higher stability of the microbes which are present there. Rohana, can you please go to the previous slide? Okay, so we can learn a lot from these systems, but we don't really know all the triggers that are responsible for this. So we have to invest more into microbiome studies using all of the state-of-the-art tools to try to further develop this and have a better approach of microbial management. Next slide, please. The final purpose is to then complement our current approaches, such as disinfection and probiotics, with these new approaches, including system design and operation, to ensure more microbial stability and predictability, and as such, totally minimize the risk for infectious disease to occur. Next slide, please. The second topic deals with fish welfare. As you're all also aware, from the moment that an animal becomes infected with a pathogen and gets disease, there is an impairment of the welfare of the animal. But it also works the other way around. The welfare status also influences the risk for pathogenic infection. Animals with a high status of welfare are less exposed or show less risk to having a pathogenic infection. Next slide, please. So that's why we have to consider to include these aspects of welfare into the biosecurity programs. And to some extent, we're already doing that. Think, for example, about the function-based dimension of welfare, where we try to make sure that the animals are able to physiologically cope with their environment and in general are in good health. Think, for example, about good water quality, good feed composition, good feeding rates, etc. But these are things that we can really measure and we can determine what is the effect on production. So that's why it's relatively easy to do so. The two other dimensions are not so standardly included. Think, for example, about nature-based welfare, where we try to make sure that animals can lead the natural lives with their natural adaptations. In fact, it means that animals can do what nature has designed them to do. The last dimension is the feeling-based aspect of welfare, where we try to make sure that animals are free from a longer exposure to unpleasant conditions, such as anxiety, fear, or hunger, and have access to rewarding experiences, such as companionship and comfort. Now, these latter two dimensions of welfare, they're not so standard because they're not so easy to measure, and the effect on production is not so easily seen. But they are important also from a production perspective and from a fact that it's becoming more and more of a public concern. So we have to try to integrate them into the biosecurity programs. Next slide, please. And how do we do that? Well, to do that, we need to first understand what are the parameters that contribute to one or more of these welfare dimensions. Think, for example, about what has been done for salmon, where we have a whole list of parameters that seem to be influencing one or more of these dimensions. And from the moment that we have identified of being of influence, then we can start thinking about how we can turn them into practical tools to monitor and to observe what is the welfare status of the animals that we are culturing. Think, for example, about the use of underwater cameras, which can not only be used to monitor feed uptake and feeding rates and feed efficiency, but it can also be used to optimize abnormal behavior of the animals that we are culturing, up to the level that we can start thinking about using artificial intelligence to identify for us when something is abnormal. But this is, sorry, Rohana, please, like previous slide. Yeah, but this is something that these kind of approaches and thinking about these kind of operational welfare indicators, these are things that seem to be present for the most commercially relevant species. And this brings us to the last topic of this talk, being on research and technology. Next slide, please. As I said, most of the research is focused on commercially important and traded and internationally traded species. But we should not forget that a lot of less commercially important species provide livelihoods to many smallholders and contribute to global nutrition and food security. So we should also invest in research and technology development on those species. Next slide, please. And how do we do that? How do we consider the R&D frameworks and systems that we have to put in place? Well, it depends on the aquaculture in itself, but also on who should benefit from the outcomes. For example, for early stage aquaculture sectors, we see that a lot of the new investment should come from governments and donors to actually create knowledge that should belong to the public good. Think about animal husbandry, about optimal feeding and optimal feeding rates, about reproduction and so on. And there, the people that benefit or the groups that benefit are governments and mainly small scale producers. As the sector develops and becomes more and more commercialized, the real clients become larger scale producers. And that's also why a larger part of the funding for those research also comes from the sector itself. While the industry, while the governments in that sense then can focus more on developing more regulatory tools, which are then practical, effective, and really needed to further develop the industry from those sides. Next slide, please. And finally, when you think about research and technology development in the context of biosecurity, there is, from the coming decade, a lot of topics that we can focus ourselves on, and tackling each of those within the presentation would take us too far. But you can see that some of the things which I mentioned, for example, microbiome studies, welfare studies, development of artificial intelligence, they will become important towards the future. With that, I'd like to thank you for your attention, and I give the word to the next speaker.
Thank you very much, Peter. I think Melba will not be, is not presenting live today. Secretariat, can we have the pre-recorded presentation, the third part?
I will try again. Please stop sharing the screen.
Sure.
Good day, everyone. My name is Melba Riantasa from FAO, and I'm going to present 5 topics under this session on biosecurity. First, I will talk about emergency.
I cannot see anything on the screen, Graham. The video is gone.
Okay, I try again. So you here have no audio and no video. Let's try with Elisa.
Yeah,
Elisa, this is Austin. Would you be ready to share the video?
Good day, everyone. My name is Melba Riantasa from FAO, and I'm going to present 5 topics under this session on biosecurity. First, I will talk about emergency preparedness and response. Second is disease and pathogen surveillance. Third is policies and regulatory frameworks. Fourth is antimicrobial resistance. And the last is FAO's progressive management pathway for improving aquaculture biosecurity. Thank you very much. The first topic that I'm going to present is on emergency preparedness and response. Emergency preparedness is the ability to respond effectively and in a timely fashion to disease emergencies such as disease outbreaks, mass mortality events, and fish kills. The capability to deal with emergency disease situations requires a great deal of planning and coordination, including operational, financial, and legislative mechanisms, and making available required resources such as skilled personnel, essential equipment, and advanced emergency fund. There are many international examples as well as guidelines, audit system, and shared experiences that it is no longer plausible not to invest in prevention strategies and infrastructure. The overall objectives are to first prevent the incursion of exotic pathogens and pests, to put in place a rapid, well-organized, and appropriate response to an emergency disease incident, and to have a successful management of disease outbreaks. Following investments are essential to reduce losses from aquatic animal diseases. The porous interface between many aquaculture production systems and natural or wild aquatic animal populations is one of the principal drivers of disease emergence and spread in aquaculture. Further interactions arise from the use of wild aquatic animals as broodstock or from unprocessed aquatic animal products used as aquaculture feed. Disease surveillance illuminates the pathogen diversity within wild aquatic animal populations and the potential risk for pathogen transfer between wild and cultured stocks. These insights are especially important in regions where new aquaculture ventures are planned. Awareness is increasing and efforts have been made, but health services are still inadequate in aquaculture countries. There is a lack of trained and qualified professionals in the design and conduct of surveillance programs. The weak system of regulation by competent authorities also mean weak national surveillance systems. Countries are therefore unable to meet OIE surveillance standards that are necessary to demonstrate and maintain disease-free status, preventing them from taking full advantage of the system that was established by the SPS Agreement of World Trade Organization to minimize the spread of disease via trade. Delayed detection of the causes of disease outbreaks also results to higher response costs to control these outbreaks. Thus, improving surveillance and biosecurity requires strengthened government services, regulation, and making available the required costs. So what is the way forward? The relationship between investment in surveillance, for example, early detection of disease incursions, and the costs of intervention to mitigate disease need to be integrated through economic modeling into decision-making. Passive surveillance systems will make a step change when designed around the needs of data providers. Barriers to data procurement will be overcome as web-based and mobile interfaces become standard and will greatly contribute towards farmer-centric systems. Improved understanding of disease risk factors will allow risk-based surveillance to become more widely applied and better focused, thus improving the economic efficiency of surveillance. National strategic planning on aquatic health management and biosecurity is vital to reduce the vulnerability of the aquatic sector to new and emerging diseases and the often ad hoc and reactive solutions to serious transboundary aquatic diseases and mass mortality events in aquatic populations. FAO has long encouraged member countries to develop and formalize national strategies for aquatic animal health and health management procedures. They are broad yet comprehensive strategy to build and enhance capacity for the management of aquatic biosecurity and health. It contains the national action plans at the short, medium, and long term and using phased implementation based on national needs and priorities. The technical elements will vary depending on an individual country's situation. So you will find in this slide the different elements or components of a national strategy, starting from policy, legislation, and enforcement, border inspection and quarantine, antimicrobial resistance, surveillance reporting and monitoring, zoning and compartmentalization, emergency preparedness and contingency planning, and so on and so forth. You will note here that the different elements are sort of divided into different stages that pertains to the stage 1, 2, and 3 of the active management pathway that I will present later on. Additional elements and components may be identified as having national or regional importance, and they need to be included. Due to the negative externalities associated with aquatic animal diseases, there is an obligation on authorities to implement national legislation related to biosecurity. According to the experts, most international
We lost
challenges to society, and
right.
as such, aquatic animal health should be considered as a public good. Ideally, national legislation should therefore equally protect the interests of various stakeholders and may include general factors like, for example, designation of competent authorities with clear delineation of responsibilities, farm characteristics, protocols on import requirements, and compulsory training and education. Concerns on antimicrobial agent resistance in bacteria associated with aquaculture and the aquatic environment are associated with, for example, the negative impact on the therapy of bacterial diseases of animals raised in this industry. Another one is potential negative impact on the therapy of bacterial diseases in consumers of the products of the industry. And third is, since AMR is encoded by transferable resistance genes, it will contribute to the total environmental resistance. Since the adoption of the Global Action Plan on AMR in 2015, member states are encouraged to develop the National Action Plan on AMR within the One Health framework. The current international governance of AMR is through the joint AMR tripartite that involves WHO, OIE, and FAO plus UNEP. There has been great advances in awareness on AMR. There are surveillance programs for antimicrobial usage and AMR in both aquatic and terrestrial farmed animals. There are also standard methods for susceptibility testing of most of the species that are frequently isolated from aquatic animals. Adoption of these standards are encouraged. But we also need to be cognizant of the fact that AMR may be naturally present in the aquatic environment or derived from AMU in other sectors or derived from AMU in aquaculture. Source attribution of AMR in aquaculture-associated bacteria is very complex. You will find on this graph on the right side the routes by which antimicrobial resistant bacteria and resistance genes can cycle through human populations and terrestrial and aquatic systems. We need caution in data interpretation because mere detection of AMR in aquaculture systems does not imply misuse of antimicrobials in aquaculture. The direct link between resistance profile and AMU needs to be clearly established. Okay, so now let's talk about progressive management pathway for improving aquaculture biosecurity. PMP refers to a pathway that is aimed at enhancing aquaculture biosecurity by building on existing frameworks, capacity, and appropriate tools using risk-based approaches and public-private sector partnership. The PMPAD is expected to result to sustainably reduce disease burden, improve health at farm and national levels, minimize the global spread of diseases, optimize the socioeconomic benefits from aquaculture, attract investment opportunities into aquaculture, and achieve the One Health goals. So the PMP is an extension of the progressive control pathway that is used for livestock diseases. It has 4 stages. Each stage has key indicators and activities. Risk assessment and emergency preparedness are always present at every stage. Biosecurity action plans, they serve as gateway passes to move from one stage to another. The national strategy on aquatic animal health that I have mentioned earlier is one of the major activity and requirement for stage 1. And the PMP follows the principles of being risk-based, progressive, and collaborative. Okay, so let us now look more closely at the PMPAB key indicators and activities. For stage 1, key considerations and outcomes include production chain mapping, description of the current situation and identification of priority commodities and diseases, threats and vulnerabilities, identification of critical control points to mitigate key threats and vulnerabilities. There's basic capacity in emergency management, development of enabling environment. For example, competent authority identified, there's a draft national pathogen list, public-private PMP task force formed, and legislative review. At stage 3, the strategies are revised and policies implemented. There is continuous surveillance for existing, exotic, and emerging pathogens. And there's also efficient and effective outbreak management. And one of the indicators is that disease incidence and impact are reduced. Enabling environment, some of the indicative activities include conducting cost-benefit analysis, formation of multi-agency task force, legislation for full implementation of strategies and enforcement of policies, enhanced laboratory capacity for rapid detection, emergency preparedness, and response audit. Commitment from public and private stakeholders to safeguard progress, including investors. Let us now look at the country entry points. What you will see here are the 4 different scenarios, which means that any country at whatever stage of aquaculture development and whatever competence they have on aquatic animal health of aquaculture biosecurity, there is a possibility to enter PMP. So for example, scenario 1, these are countries with no aquaculture biosecurity nor national strategy on aquatic animal health, but they have aquaculture or starting with aquaculture. And scenario 4, these are countries sharing watersheds or water bodies, regions with regional biosecurity strategies, for example, SADC, the Pacific Community, the Gulf countries. So how can this be used and built upon? So what can PMP offer? PMP can offer a co-management approach that uses greater use of planning processes that brings stakeholders together. And this is a solid platform for private sector partnership. It offers wide ownership and active engagement and long-term commitment to risk management. There is a governance mechanism and a range of toolkits and, as mentioned earlier, specific entry points for any country. PMP is progressive and it offers opportunity for longevity, responsive to environmental and anthropological challenges, and enabling policy environments that includes adoption of sound aquaculture production practices. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. I think the concluding session is coming up. Victoria's concluding session will be on video.
Elisa, can you share the next video, please?
Actually, Victoria is on live and we probably can do it on live also.
Let's just wait a second. Okay, I think maybe it's better, Rohanna, if you show the slides, if Victoria is able to speak to it.
Okay, let me do that. Victoria, I'm trying to share the screen. Can you continue for the conclusions, please? Victoria, you are muted.
Yes, please, next. So we can all conclude and we all agree that diseases not only cause catastrophic losses, but they reduce the production efficiency and increase the production cost. We also all agree that aquaculture production will continue increasing and biosecurity needs to be integrated into production and needs to be proactive. We should not always be behind the disease. So as a principle, you know, diseases are a shared global threat. It involves all of us. So health should not be a competitive advantage, should be a shared responsibility. So as the way forward, the first thing is we need cost-effective biosecurity. So one of the points is that we need accounting the economic burden of the diseases, or not only the economic, but the social accounting, the consequences of the diseases. And we also should do that for successful biosecurity cases. And that will help to understand what is the benefit of investing in biosecurity for aquaculture producers. Next. We need new strategies, both at international, national, and farm level. So when we look at international level, we need to improve transparency in reporting. Over the last years, this has become a bigger issue. We need the adaptation of standards. We need to feel governments and industry, the support from international organizations. We need to improve the coordination for pathogen introduction other than trade, as Dr. Johanna has been discussing today, through ballast water, through currents, etc. And we need to prioritize in terms of risk. The higher risk is the movement of live animals rather than aquatic product. And maybe this prioritization will help in terms of transparency reporting. At national level, we need effective and realistic legal frameworks for the control of pathogen introduction and spread. Sometimes these controls or this legislation is too tight, and as a result, we have illegal introductions. We need to improve diagnostic capacity through training. We should not forget all what is tissue-based diagnostic, histopathology, that has been left behind over the years with the adoption of molecular technologies. Research funding, the different areas that Peter has been discussing. We need surveillance programs that can help in terms of decision-making, both for pathogen diseases and antimicrobial resistance. In antimicrobial resistance, we need to adopt standard methodologies, and we need to get a consensus in terms of interpretation of the results. Emergency preparedness is always a big challenge, both technically and in terms of resources. We need to prepare for that. And important, the dissemination of the knowledge. It is both residing in the academia and the industry, how we can share it, how can we collaborate closer. At farm level, as Johanna discussed already, we support the use of the clean seed of SPF stocks to avoid perpetuation of diseases. Aquaculture has still keep an interface with the wild, through the use of wild fry or wild broodstock or cage or pond-based broodstock, or the use of unprocessed aquatic feeds. So that leads to the perpetuation again of diseases and also the appearance of new diseases every number of years. We need to improve the welfare. As Peter was saying, this is very important. This is just husbandry. We see that, health is a measure of productivity. So the healthier the animal is, the better the conditions, the bigger the productivity. We need a better understanding of the microbiome and how we can apply it into aquaculture production, the adoption of vaccines, development of new ones, and the use of farm-level diagnostic tools, something that can allow the farmers to take decisions. All this together will decrease the use of antimicrobials. Finally, we support the adoption of FAO, PMP project that Melba has been explaining. Is a very cooperative, is very supportive approach, and it's a stepwise, easy to implement project. And finally, Johanna, next. Yeah. we need to strengthen the public-private partnership. There is an interdependence of the two bodies and is key for the success of the biosecurity. And I think with this, just one final statement, effective biosecurity is an essential component of the sustainability of aquaculture and its contribution to global food security in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Victoria. I think that ends the presentation. We are left with less than 30 minutes of a discussion. And this panel discussion, we have all the presenters, and we also have 2 additional panelists to come in. Dr. Huang Ji, can you identify yourself? Are you available? Are you in the Zoom meeting now?
Rohanna, he is in the meeting, but he doesn't appear to be accepting the invitation to become a panelist.
All right, so we will continue without G, but if he joins, yes, he can sort of continue help in the discussion. I would like to bring one more panel member, Dr. Patrick Sorgelos, to the panel. Dr. Patrick Sorgelos, whom probably all of you know, since his participation at the first technical conference on aquaculture organized by FAO in 1976, Professor Sorgelos has been involved in aquaculture development cooperation in Asia, Latin America, Africa, and Europe, all over the world. In 1978, he set up the Artemia Reference Center, and in 1986, he became the first professor of aquaculture at Ghent University. Until his retirement as Emeritus Professor in 2013, over 250 master's students from 50 countries and over 70 PhD alumni from over 20 countries graduated at Ghent University under his supervision. No need to say more. And Professor Patrick Sorgelos is a well-known global icon. I can see Dr. Huang Ji is now joining us. Ji, are you there? Yes, right. So Dr. Huang Ji is the Director General of NACA, the Network of Aquaculture Centers in Asia Pacific. He devotes himself to strengthening the network. And Dr. Ji previously served as a principal investigator in the Yellow Sea Fisheries Research Institute, Chinese Academy of Fisheries Science. Dr. Ji is also designated expert of the OIE Reference Laboratory for World White Spot Disease. He's been well written. He has over 175 corresponding author papers and has been awarded 14 patents as the first inventor. So more than 100 doctoral and master level students supervised and postdoctoral scientists have been completed their studies under Dr. G's supervision. The panel discussion will work like that. Unfortunately, we don't have much time today, but if you have any questions, please put the questions into question and answers box. And Professor Shang will have to collect any questions from the group in Shanghai, and we will try to answer as many as possible questions over the next 25 minutes. And whatever we could not will be dealt by the authors and will be reflected in the final document that will be produced in this review. I will give the floor to Dr. Shang first from China. Do you have any questions? Make it short, please. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Rohanna. Thank you very much. And thanks, Dr. Victoria and Dr. Rohanna and Dr. Peter and Dr. Melba's presentation. And thanks for Rohanna's excellent hosting. And I have a short comment on today's topic. And then I have a question to Rohanna. My comment is, as we know, aquaculture is the fast growing sector in the global food producing. And in this past decade, aquaculture encountered more like disease problems. And today's topic, biosecurity, will be surely the first priority of the aquaculture futures development. As we know, the natures of the biosecurity or the essence of the biosecurity is the biological risk analysis and the management. This means the first step of the biosecurity is to detect the pathogen condition. That means the pathogen diagnosis is very important to the biosecurity. And actually, we have some experience in China for sharing, and effectiveness, the efficient prevention of the new coronavirus by the Chinese government has inspired the aquaculture farmers in China. And because the government controlled the new coronavirus very quickly, they do the nucleic acid diagnosis. So the farmers know that if they want to control the fish disease, they want to do the nucleic acid diagnosis of the pathogen. And I think this is very important for the biosecurity. And actually, just now, Rohana, you mentioned the package in your presentation. And I think the package is very important or vital tools in the biosecurity measures. And my question is, does the FAO supply some information of the package method or the commercial package from the FAO website or some other platform? This is my question, Rohana. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question, Professor Shang. Is Melba around?
Mm-hmm.
Melba, can you hear me? You muted.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you well.
Yeah, sorry, we have to wear a mask when we are inside the office.
Right. The why I'm asking is the question, Dr. Shang's question is posed to FAO about the point care, diagnostics. She's asking whether any FAO is doing anything about these point care diagnostics.
Well,
very short answer, please. Thank you.
Yeah, Rohana, you have presented in your presentation that FAO has long time promoted the level 1, level 2, and level 3 diagnostics. So level 1 is something that can be done at the pond side by the farmers, not using any sophisticated equipment, but it's just using the eyes, clinical observations and observation of the environment and observation of the farming practices. For me, as a traditional fish health specialist, it's very important to have level 1 diagnosis at the pond side, because if we and FAO has been promoting level 1, level 2. Victoria said that we are losing this discipline, the pathology, because of this advent of level 3, which is more molecular-based diagnostics. But for us, it's level 1, level 2, level 3 is a continuum of observations. And it is nearly difficult to make an accurate interpretation of level 3 if you don't have information on level 1 and level 2. Thank you very much. I hope I have answered your question.
Thank you, Melba. Yes, you did. Thank you very much. It takes us a long history and memories of years before. Right. There are many questions coming up in the question and answers box, but we cannot really address everything because we are very much tight for time. But I will give 2 questions to Dr. G and Dr. Zogaluz, and because they have not said anything yet. Patrick, this question is for you. If you have anything else to mention, please do so, but please make it short. Responding to the current climate change and the carbon emission issues, in which area of aquaculture you think innovations and technology development research should be given priority, particularly in the field of aquatic animal health for the next decade? Thank you.
Well, that's a complicated question. I will try to answer it in the framework of this session, Aquaculture Biosecurity. So I think one item is what will be the stressors through the climate change on the animals. We know temperature increases, salinity increases. Think about the problems with the pangasius in Vietnam. I think that's where genetics will come in and will certainly contribute. But there is another aspect that I would like to bring up here. We heard about the importance to improve the aquatic animal health, but I make the link with the presentations that we heard yesterday in the plenary sessions. I think even in the field of aquaculture biosecurity, we need to think more about ecosystem-based systems. I think we might have reached the maximum in the intensive monoculture, pond systems, cage systems, and we see some empirical evidence, what Peter was mentioning on microbial instability, and that might be typical maybe for such extreme systems that have then the impact on the animals. From what we heard yesterday, also in these plenary and keynote sessions, I think we should pay more attention to the empirical work that is being done, for example, in China, where the polyculture systems indeed are now looked mainly from the point of view of water quality, but maybe we should also pay more attention to what are the benefits, possible benefits on the animals in terms of their immune resistance, in terms of their overall health system. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. I have a question for Dr. Wang Ji. The question is, how can a biosecurity system deal with emerging diseases such as infection with Decapod Irritations virus 1, DIV1, which is a newly emerging disease? If you can answer short in 2 minutes, please.
Thank you, Rohanna. I think it's a good question how a biosecurity can prevent emerging disease such as DIV1. Usually, emerging disease may not be timely detected or diagnosed by existing surveillance plan. It brings risk to the aquaculture system. However, compared with the aquaculture system without improved biosecurity system, the biosecurity system can provide a set of health strategies and measures, including facilities and management with shared responsibilities of public and private sector. Such health strategies and measures will make this aquaculture system in a condition that is not conducive to the introduction, transmission, and spread of pathogens. This is the key basis of the biosecurity system to prevent the resistance of the entire aquaculture system to low and unknown diseases. For example, measures such as the isolation and disinfection of people, vehicle, tools, and facilities, and the health requirements of post-larvae can greatly reduce the introduction of disease risks. Furthermore, for emerging diseases, the early warning system of biosecurity system will play important roles so that emerging disease can be warned at the early stage, and particularly particular prevention measures can be strengthened. Meanwhile, the disease surveillance and monitoring plan and risk assessment of the biosecurity system can be timely identified the resource, route, and risk of the emerging disease. For the prevention of DIV1, actually, NACA website has published DIV1 disease card and also the DRV1 disease advisory, and also this disease has been listed as OIE listed disease. So you can find this information from the LAC website, elac.com.org. Thank you.
Thank you, G. Thank you very much. Right. Again, I'm looking at the clock. We have only a few minutes left. There are several questions in the question and answer box. Unfortunately, we won't be able to go through all of them. But there is one comment from one of our friends from Africa that about not being able to bring an African sort of inputs into the review. Yes, there were some problems and we regret, but this is from Peter, I think. Please read the manuscript, which is available online, provide your comments, and we are happy to incorporate in the review when we finalize it over the next couple of weeks. Please do send your comments. Anything special, we will certainly take it up. Thank you. I can go for two more questions. First question is to Victoria. Very short answer, please. What's the difference between healthy seeds and SPF animals?
Mentioned in your presentation, infected animals may appear healthy. It's not the same infection than disease. So SPF, it's just a process to ensure that those animals are not infected. So an SPF, it means at least 2 years of surveillance program in place, different techniques, the frequency, the number of animals in the sample needs to be controlled, and it's animals raised under high biosecurity, with biosecure feeds, yes, where we are treating the water, etc. So the advantages of SPF is that we start with animals which are not infected, so we have higher chances of success. It also allows you to have a more efficient biosecurity. And by that, I don't mean only exclusion of pathogens, it only means we're reducing the chances of diseases. So we can vaccinate the fish and it will be a better response, for instance. It also allows to have for higher densities. SPF is also required for research purposes or genetic development as you remove the variable of the disease in the selection process. The main drawback is that development of SPF requires high technical level to develop and maintain these stocks. And how can we fund these developments, particularly for low-level species? So even if they appear to be a higher cost to produce them, actually it's not a higher cost, it's just a centralized cost, which is much smaller than a share wider cost of the disease outbreak. So
thank you.
That's all. Thank you, Rohana.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Again, I'm looking at the clock. Professor Shang, we can have one last short question for a short answer from you, if there is any.
I have a question from Dr. Xihua, a researcher from Yellow Sea Fishery Research Institute. And her question is that because the biosecurity is very important for the aquaculture animal health, and OIE also listed the biosecurity as a single chapter in this year. And her question is, because in different countries, the development stage is very variety. And what is the biggest difficult in the implementation of the biosecurity? And I think today's panel is very interested in the biosecurity. And Dr. Xiuhua's question is, what is the biggest
hurdle? Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Shang. I'm going to throw this to the panel, and anybody can pick it up. What's the biggest hurdle in applying efficient biosecurity in aquaculture? 1 minute. Anybody? Yes, go ahead, please. You're muted.
I would say that the main challenge is the public-private partnership, the coordination and cooperation between national governments and the private sector. The private industry needs the support of the governments to structure the legislation, the planning, etc. So to me, my opinion, my biggest challenge is the coordination between governments and private sector.
Thank you very much. I think that's the answer to your question, Professor Shang. I will take one more question and wrap up. The last question goes to Peter. Can you explain a bit more in 1 minute about microbiome studies and the relevance and the contribution of microbiome studies to managing health in aquaculture? 1 minute, please.
Yeah, sure. I'll do my best. The main reason for these need for these microbiome studies is because until recently and still today, we didn't realize enough what we were doing. I mean, we all know that disinfection approaches and so on, they are needed, but they focus specifically on a certain amount of pathogens, known pathogens, and we didn't realize what were the consequences at the whole other level on all kinds of other microbes. So the first part of these microbiome studies, the need is to further understand how microbial communities standardly develop in aquaculture systems among different kinds of aquaculture systems that we are considering, and what are the impacts in terms of which bacteria develop, how fast do they develop, what are relative balances, and so on. Because if we get insight into how microbial communities develop, then we can try to link that to the performance of the animals. And based on these links, we can see what kind of changes, what kind of microbial community statuses and so on, linked to the performance of the animals, something which up to date, we don't really know. And once we get insight into how microbial community development and composition influences animal health, then we can start to think about what can we do to steer that into a specific direction. For example, optimizing the use of probiotics, implementing a specific design, not just focusing on water quality, but also focusing on, let's say, microbial quality, all that with the purpose to better understand what we are doing and to then increase the predictability, because that's what it comes down to in the end. The purpose of full microbial management is not to increase growth, is not to just increase survival when there are no problems related to disease. It's just to increase the level of predictability of what we are doing. And that's in the end what everybody is aiming at.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you very much for that concise answer. Unfortunately, we cannot take any more questions. We regret that we cannot answer all questions came up in the question and answer box, but definitely we will deal with them and incorporate your views and try the answers, if possible, into the final document that will be prepared over the next couple of weeks. Thank you, panelists, and you've been excellent, very productive presentations and a question and answer discussion. And thank you, Dr. Shang, for your support from Shanghai and the group and the questions and the patience, certainly over the past hour and a half. Remember, the thematic paper drafts are available on the GZA website. Please visit them and give your comments, and we will take them up. This concludes the thematic review portion of the GCA. So now we are all headed back to plenary after our dinner break or lunch break or breakfast, whatever you are. I will now ask everyone to leave this webinar and rejoin the plenary webinar. The room will be open shortly, but it will be monitored and we will be starting in few minutes time. Thank you.